Chapter 8 Bud's Jazz Records, 1986. Henry closed the yearbook in his lap, setting it on the carved cherry wood coffee table next to the framed photograph of him and Ethel on their 13th wedding anniversary. To Henry, her smiling face looked thin, gracefully hiding a certain sadness. In the photo, she was in early remission, but still was missing most of her hair from the radiation treatments. It didn't fall out all at once like you see in the movies. It came apart in uneven clumps, thick in some places, smooth in others. She'd asked Henry to use a set of clippers and shave it all off, which he did, reluctantly. It was the first of many personal moments they would share together. A long sabbatical into the day-to-day care, part of the mechanics of dying. He'd done all he could, but choosing to lovingly care for her was like steering a plane into a mountain as gently as possible. The crash is imminent. It's how you spend your time on the way down that counts. He thought about moving on, but didn't even know where to begin. So he went where he'd always gone to stimulate his senses, even as a little boy. A place where he always found a little comfort. He grabbed his hat and jacket and found himself stalking the dusty aisles of Bud's Jazz Records. Bud's had been a fixture on South Jackson, near the old Pioneer Square, for as long as Henry could remember. Of course, the original Bud Long didn't actually own the place anymore. But the new guy, a grizzled fellow with sagging hangdog cheeks like those of a partially deflated Dizzy Gillespie, filled the part amicably. He tended the record counter, where he readily answered to the name Bud. "Haven't seen you in a while, Henry." "I've been around," Henry said, flipping through a rack of old 78s, hoping to find something by Oscar Holden, the holy grail of Seattle's jazz recordings. The apocryphal story was that Oscar recorded a Master Session 78 way back in the 30s, on vinyl, not wax. But of the rumored 300 printed, none survived. None that anyone knew about, anyway. But then again, almost no one knew who Oscar Holden was. Seattle greats like Ray Charles and Quincy Jones had moved on to the fame and fortune of Celebrityville. Still, Henry daydreamed that he might find a vinyl copy someday. And now that CDs were starting to outsell records, the used LP bins at Bud's were overflowing with new used records every day. If one still existed, someone was bound to throw it out, or trade it in, not knowing what that dusty old recording meant to avid collectors like Henry. After all, Oscar who? Bud turned the music down a bit. "You ain't been around here, 'cause I'd have seen you if you were around here." Something modern was playing. Overton Berry, Henry guessed, from the deep melancholy of the piano. Henry thought about his absence. He'd been a regular for most of his adult life, and part of his youth. "My turntable was broken." And it had been, so it wasn't a lie. Besides, how do I tell him my wife died 6 months ago? No sense in turning Bud's jazz records into Bud's blues records. "You hear about the Panama Hotel?" the old dealer asked. Henry nodded, still thumbing through the rack, his nose itchy from the dust that always settled in the basement record shop. "I was standing right there when they started bringing all that stuff up." "You don't say." Bud rubbed his bald black pate. "I know what you're always in here looking for." "Oh, I gave up looking for Oscar myself, but it sure makes you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, they board up that whole building. What, around 1950? And then that new owner buys it, goes inspecting, and finds all that stuff sealed up all those years. Newspaper says there ain't much of value in there. No gold bars or anything. But it makes you wonder. Henry had wondered non-stop since he'd watched them bring up that first steamer trunk, since the owner had spun that Japanese parasol. Henry fished out an LP by the Seattle jazz drummer Webb Coleman and set it on the counter. I guess this'll do it. Bud slipped the old record in a used Uwajimaya grocery bag and handed it right back. This one's on me, Henry. I'm sorry about your wife. Bud's eyes looked like they'd seen plenty of suffering in his own time. Ethel was a fine woman. I know you did right by her. Henry found a weak smile and thanked him. Some people read the obituaries every day, even in a sprawling place like the Emerald City. But the International District was just a small town. People know everything about everyone. And just as in other small towns, when someone leaves, they never come back.